El episodio que revisamos hoy refleja cómo las declaraciones de Donald Trump, incluso cuando parecen anecdóticas, terminan exponiendo inconsistencias profundas en su manera de recordar hechos recientes. La secuencia comienza con un cruce con el gobernador de Maryland, Wes Moore, y se transforma en un boomerang político cuando un canal como Fox emite imágenes que contradicen directamente lo dicho por el presidente. Recordatorio rápido: si estos videos te gustan, apóyanos con un me gusta, comentando y suscribiéndote, nos ayudas muchísimo. Entonces, vamos con la noticia.
Well, the president seems to be obsessed with me. Today he called me a beauty, and when I first met him, he just talked about how I was a good-looking guy. And now he just continues to make statements that are just flat-out false about our state's largest city. The reality is that when I first became the governor, Baltimore in 2022 had about a homicide a day. Now, in the past 2.5 years, Baltimore and the state of Maryland have had amongst the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in the United States. The last time the homicide rate was this low in Baltimore City, I was not born yet. And we have done it by making historic investments in law enforcement, by making historic investments in predictive technologies, and we've done it by actually working with the mayor, working with the state's attorney, working with community violence intervention groups, and working with the community to be able to ensure that people can feel safer in their neighborhoods. And the thing is that we know we have more work to do, but we're not going to be performative or cynical about the way we are doing it, and not taking the approach that the President of the United States seems to be taking about making people safe in communities.
En lugar de debatir con cifras, Trump recurrió a un recuerdo personal. Afirmó que Moore lo elogió como el mejor presidente de su vida durante un encuentro en un juego deportivo. Esa versión buscaba colocarlo en un lugar de prestigio frente a un gobernador opositor. Sin embargo, lo que parecía una anécdota favorable terminó volviéndose en su contra.
I met him at the Army-Navy game. They said, "Oh, there's Governor Moore. He'd love to see you." He came over to me, he hugged me, shook my hand. You were there. He said, "Sir, you're the greatest president of my lifetime." I said, "It's really nice that you say that. I'd love you to say it publicly, but I don't think you can do that, so it's okay. But no, sir, you're doing a fantastic job. I want to just shake your hand. Thank you very much, Governor." That was it. And then every time I see him on television, he's knocking the hell out of me. So.
And the thing that gets me most about this is how deeply disrespectful this is to members of the National Guard who signed up for this job, as I did when I deployed overseas and I led paratroopers in combat, where we signed up with the expectation that the commander-in-chief and the people who was declaring our orders was actually taking it seriously. And the problem is we are seeing a lack of seriousness from the President of the United States to a very serious situation. And that's why I invited him to come to Baltimore, to come be educated, to come learn, so he doesn't have to spout nonsense from the Oval Office and things that are just blatantly not true about what is actually happening and the work that's happening in coordination to make people feel safer in their neighborhoods.
El material audiovisual desmonta el relato de Trump con una precisión difícil de ignorar. Lo más llamativo es que no fue un medio opositor quien lo hizo, sino un canal históricamente cercano a su figura. De inmediato surge la pregunta: ¿se trató de un simple error de memoria o de una alteración deliberada de los hechos para sostener su imagen? En cualquiera de los dos escenarios, la credibilidad del presidente se resquebraja.
Knocking the hell out of him. Wes Moore is posting on social media saying that President Trump can't walk, but maybe he should walk the streets of Baltimore. It didn't take him long to respond to the president there in the Oval Office. He said, "LOL, keep telling yourself that, Mr. President." It'd be wild, though, if only we had the footage that President Trump had referenced about them meeting at the Army-Navy game. And thanks to The Art of the Surge on Fox Nation, we have the footage.
Mr. President, welcome back to Maryland, sir. Welcome back to Maryland. It's good to see you.
In person, too.
Thank you, sir. Great to see you. Great to see you. And great to have you back here. Great to have you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we are very, very anxious to be able to work closely with you, and I know the Key Bridge is something that we're specifically focused on. It's going well. I mean, we spoke with Speaker Johnson yesterday, and Speaker Johnson says he believes that we're close to the 100% cost share. And the thing is, I told him when we get that 100% cost share done, we are going to be able to go over the Key Bridge under your watch, because I will have it done in 28, on time and on budget.
We'll help you out.
Thank you, sir.
We didn't hear their greatest president ever, but we did hear a lot of enthusiasm and so excited to meet you, Mr. President. Who's telling the truth? We'll let you decide.
El contraste entre ambas versiones es revelador. Mientras Moore responde con calma y pone el foco con logros verificables, Trump insiste en un recuerdo que no coincide con la evidencia pública. Esa diferencia refuerza la imagen de un líder enfrascado en percepciones personales frente a un gobernador que busca proyectar resultados concretos.
Did you interact with him at any other point in that conversation? Did you ever tell him he was the greatest president in your lifetime?
I know this is breaking news to everybody, but the president is not telling the truth. What happened right there was when I first met the president, and then after he started talking about how I'm a good-looking guy, I started talking about the importance of the Key Bridge and how this state put on a case study on how to recover in times of crisis, that we were able to bring closure to all 6 families, to the individuals who were lost that night on the Key Bridge. And when they told us it was going to take 11 months to clear the federal channel, that this state got it done in 11 weeks. And we started talking about how it was going to get done. And then he later on invited me to come sit with him at the game. And I told him, I said, I'm good. I have my own seats. And I went to go sit with the cadets and the midshipmen. So, no, I never called him the greatest. And I just find it absolutely comical that that was the way he remembered that conversation.
Governor Westmore, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much.
Lo que ocurre en Indiana añade otra capa al mismo problema. Cuando los hechos y la popularidad no alcanzan, se intenta modificar las reglas para garantizar ventajas políticas. Este esfuerzo, combinados con las distorsiones en la forma en que Trump recuerda y comunica, dibuja un panorama de fragilidad estratégica dentro de su movimiento y de su propia figura.
Fresh off a pressure campaign against Texas Republicans who complied and redrew their maps, today Donald Trump hosted Republican lawmakers from Indiana. Indiana appears to be the next target in the Trump administration's very transparent but shameless power grab to shield Republicans from being accountable to the will of voters in the 2026 midterm elections. But there's some new polling from Indiana that has a bit of a warning light for state Republicans there. Politico reports this, quote, 52% of registered voters in Indiana, which Trump won by 19 points last year, said they are against Republicans revising their maps, with 43%, quote, strongly opposing that effort. Nearly 2/3 of the survey respondents said gerrymandering should be illegal, and a full 2/3 expressed opposition to Washington politicians meddling in their state's politics. Voters' discomfort with gerrymandering not lost on at least a few Indiana Republicans. New York Times reports at least 10 state legislators have chosen defiance, even as pressure from the White House has ramped up. Those lawmakers, a small fraction of the roughly 110 state legislative Republicans from Indiana, have expressed opposition to rare mid-decade redistricting in social media posts, interviews, and formal statements. Quote, if we do that now, the rule book gets tossed out the window. That was State Representative Jim Lucas, a Republican from southern Indiana. Besides, he said, Republicans already hold 7 of Indiana's 9 congressional seats. We have a saying, the pigs get fat, the hogs get slaughtered. Mr. Lucas said, we should be happy with what we have. I was just trying to figure out who the slaughtered hogs are. Joining our conversation is New York Times political reporter Nick Corsinati. Tim is here. Nick, where's this going in Indiana?
I think Indiana is the first state that we're going to see some real resistance to this whole effort by the president to force Republican states to redistrict in mid-decade. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is the ask coming from the White House is pretty extreme, even by what we've seen already. When Vice President Vance went to meet with leadership like the governor and the state legislative leaders in Indiana, they asked for a 9-0 map, meaning wipe all Democrats off the congressional delegation. And that's a far reach for a state that has, 39 or 40% Democratic voters in the last presidential election. So I think that instantly put some resistance in state leadership.
En conjunto, lo sucedido con Westmore, la emisión de Fox y las maniobras en Indiana dejan claro que el presidente se enfrenta a una doble dificultad. Por un lado, sostener sus propias versiones frente a la evidencia pública y por otro lado, mantener su partido alineado en un contexto de creciente desgaste. La credibilidad se convierte en su talón de Aquiles. Cada contradicción refuerza la percepción de que la distancia entre lo que él dice y lo que ocurre es cada vez mayor. Por último, ya para acabar, si este análisis te resultó útil, comenta, suscríbete y deja tu me gusta. Esto nos ayuda muchísimo, en serio. Pero bueno, sin nada más que decir, nos vemos en el siguiente rumor de estado.
La estrategia de Donald Trump frente al caso de Epstein siempre ha sido la misma: minimizar, negar y desviar la atención. Pero la reciente publicación de documentos judiciales y la declaración de Ghislaine Maxwell han vuelto a colocar al presidente en el centro de la justicia. Lo que parecía un tema cerrado reaparece por una combinación inesperada. La presión de los tribunales, los testimonios bajo juramento y, paradójicamente, las intervenciones públicas de Elon Musk. Si te está gustando el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle a like, comentar. Dicho esto, pasemos al video.
Director of the FBI, Chris Swecker, this morning, who didn't like how this looked. You know, he said, we just don't want to see the FBI weaponized. Just because you have the authority and discretion to do something like this doesn't mean that you should. And when people say that under the Biden administration that the DOJ was weaponized, let me remind you that there is nobody the Democrats dislike more than Merrick Garland, because he slow-rolled everything. I mean, Jack Smith wasn't appointed for years after January 6th. And people feel that every single case that we had, the strongest of which was Mar-a-Lago, by the way, fell apart because Merrick Garland actually didn't do anything.
You didn't weaponize it soon enough? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that we didn't have a weaponized DOJ, and the proof of that is that, and the proof is further that J.D. Vance is sitting down with Kristen Welker from Meet the Press, and listen to how he's talking. This is not an independent DOJ. We're in the very early stages of an ongoing investigation into John Bolton. We, not Pam Bondi and the DOJ, we. If we think Ambassador Bolton committed a crime, of course, eventually prosecutions will come. There's broad concern about Ambassador Bolton. We know that Donald Trump has no respect for co-equal branches of government, an independent judiciary. He just wants loyal foot soldiers.
¿Por qué un caso de Donald Trump que insiste en calificar de invención demócrata sigue creciendo en lugar de desaparecer? El debate público sobre este escándalo se ha visto acompañado de un tema más amplio: la politización de la justicia. Desde sectores conservadores se acusa al Departamento de Justicia de estar armado contra Trump, cuando en realidad los retrasos y las decisiones de no divulgar documentos durante su presidencia evidencian lo contrario. La propia relación entre Todd Blanche, abogado personal de Trump, y Maxwell deja ver la dimensión política del encubrimiento. La línea entre la defensa legal y manipulación de testigos se vuelve difusa, cuando quienes deberían representar la independencia judicial terminan actuando como operadores políticos.
This department is also sending some of the Epstein files over to the House Oversight Committee today. Are you in support of them releasing all of them?
I'm in support of keeping it open. Innocent people shouldn't be hurt, but I'm in support of keeping it totally open. I couldn't care less. You got a lot of people that it could be mentioned in those files that don't deserve to be. You know, people, because he knew everybody in Palm Beach. I don't know anything about that, but I have said to Pam and everybody else, give them everything you can give them, because it's a Democrat hoax. It's just a hoax. The whole Epstein thing is a Democrat hoax. So we had the greatest 6 months, 7 months in the history of the presidency, and the Democrats don't know what to do, so they keep bringing up that stuff. But it affected them. Bill Clinton was on his plane and went to the island supposedly 28 times. I don't want to bring that up, frankly. You have Larry, whatever his name is, Summers, the head of Harvard, who was Jeffrey Epstein's best friend. Nobody ever talks about that.
En este punto, lo que debería ser una investigación de interés público sobre redes de explotación se convierte en un campo de batalla político, donde la prioridad parece ser proteger a determinados nombres en lugar de garantizar justicia para las víctimas. Y ahí entra un factor inesperado: Elon Musk. Cuando Musk cuestiona públicamente por qué Maxwell está en prisión si no existe ninguna lista de clientes, difícil de ignorar. Si no hubo red y no hubo cómplices, ¿de qué se le acusa entonces? Este señalamiento no es un detalle menor, desmonta el relato de Trump y lo coloca nuevamente bajo sospecha, porque negar la existencia de documentos y al mismo tiempo justificar la condena de Maxwell es una contradicción imposible de sostener. Donald Trump intenta instalar la idea de que todo es un montaje político. Habla de un hoax demócrata y menciona a figuras como Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, para diluir responsabilidades. Pero los documentos, los testimonios y ahora incluso las declaraciones judiciales apuntan en otra dirección: la existencia de archivos completos, de conexiones verificables y de nombres que aún no han salido a la luz. En este escenario, el encubrimiento termina siendo tan relevante como el crimen, no solo por lo que dice de la conducta de Trump, sino por lo que revela del sistema, como los más poderosos logran manipular las investigaciones para protegerse entre sí. El punto es claro: el presidente y su círculo intentan ganar tiempo. Cada filtración, cada intervención judicial y cada contradicción pública mantiene vivo un caso que amenaza con desestabilizar al Partido Republicano y exponer redes de poder que trascienden a la política.
That was the stunt of the day. That was today's attempt to distract from the Epstein files and how many times and in what ways Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files. Donald Trump's Attorney General promised to release the Epstein files before she went to the White House to tell Donald Trump how many times his name appears in the Epstein files and in what ways his name appears in the Epstein files. And then suddenly the Attorney General and the Trump FBI director changed their minds about releasing the Epstein files. Last night on this program, Congressman Robert Garcia made news by revealing that in the secret testimony Monday to the House Oversight Committee, former Trump Attorney General William Barr said it is fully within the power of the current Attorney General to release every word of the Epstein files.
He indicated that the current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has it within her power to release those files right now. And so we're once again saying she should release the entire files. And this idea that she's going to roll out some of it on Friday and then continue this kind of planned stage rollout is not acceptable.
And today, a federal judge pointed to the Epstein files when the judge rejected the Trump Justice Department request to release the grand jury transcripts in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. The judge made it clear that the grand jury transcripts do not include any witnesses other than an FBI agent who summarized the information that they had obtained from witnesses and documents in their investigation of the case. That was enough to get an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein for his sex trafficking and raping children. Today, in his decision, Judge Richard Berman wrote, "A significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits, and the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public. The government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession. And so there is a federal judge saying in writing today that the legal maneuver that Donald Trump personally announced on social media of asking for the release of the grand jury testimony was nothing but, in the judge's words, a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files. That's what we said it was on this program the night Donald Trump said that they should release the grand jury transcripts. We said that was just a Trump diversion. Tonight, a federal judge has found that Donald Trump and his attorney general were just playing their diversion game by asking for the grand jury transcripts. That is exactly how we labeled that request for the grand jury transcripts that very night when Donald Trump announced it. The judge wrote, in February 2025, the government, as noted, was prepared to release their Epstein files to the public. But then, on July 6, 2025, the government announced it would not make the files available to the public. The information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. The judge wrote about something that Donald Trump and the Attorney General obviously care nothing about, because the Justice Department made no effort to even consult with Jeffrey Epstein's victims before requesting the release of the grand jury transcripts. And it is required by law that they consult with those victims before asking to release the grand jury transcripts. And Donald Trump's Justice Department did not do that. The judge wrote, there is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victims' safety and privacy. The court received a very compelling letter dated August 5th, 2025, from three leading victims' rights.
La intervención de los jueces federales reafirma que el verdadero problema no son los expedientes del gran jurado, que Trump exigía liberar como maniobra de distracción, sino como los más de 100 documentos que reposan en el Departamento de Justicia y que podrían contener la verdadera magnitud de esta red. El debate ya no es si existe o no una lista, sino cuándo y cómo será publicada. El caso de Epstein no es un capítulo cerrado, es un espejo de cómo la justicia puede ser utilizada para encubrir a los poderosos o para proteger a las víctimas. La figura de Donald Trump, lejos de quedar al margen, se mantiene en el centro de la situación. Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que se revelará finalmente los archivos completos del caso Epstein? ¿Hasta qué punto Trump y su entorno lograron manipular el proceso judicial? No olviden suscribirse, darle like, compartir para seguir analizando la política estadounidense sin filtros. Esto es Rumor de Estado.
En las últimas horas, Donald Trump ha dirigido su furia no contra la oposición, sino contra un presentador de Fox, una cadena que históricamente le ha servido de plataforma. El episodio es significativo porque muestra cómo el presidente reacciona incluso frente a aliados que no cumplen con sus expectativas de lealtad absoluta. Lo que se observa es un escenario donde cualquier mínimo matiz en la cobertura se convierte en un motivo de ataque personal. Como recordatorio rápido, te invitamos a que le des me gusta, te suscribas y comentes el video si te gusta este tipo de contenido. Vamos con la noticia.
Well, no, I had a couple of related questions. One is I've heard President Trump say more than once that he has lowered drug prices by 1,500%. I'm not sure how that works. And the other is, can you tell me what specific bills we've passed or worked on that would lower grocery prices?
Yeah. Well, ma'am, you're talking about things relative to state level. And so you're mixing federal and state. In terms of if you look at what the 18 enumerated powers say, the 18 enumerated powers that every member of Congress holds up their hand and swears an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. And most people who run for Congress don't know those 18 enumerated powers. And they don't know the 10th Amendment that says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states or their people respectively. And so what I'm saying to you is Oklahoma, if you want to have that conversation about grocery taxes, they've been having that conversation. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, but relative to constitutional authority and the way that I have my staff analyze things, what we're allowed to do, okay, what we're allowed to do is it has to be under the framework. We are given tax status, but tell me the federal tax right now on groceries. So what I'm saying is state. You're talking about state. Who's next?
Lo ocurrido en este encuentro ciudadano es revelador. Cuando se exige precisión sobre políticas que afectan la vida diaria, las respuestas se diluyen. Esto refleja la fragilidad del discurso que rodea a Trump, afirmaciones grandilocuentes sobre precios o logros económicos que no se sostienen al ser examinadas. De ahí la dependencia de una cobertura mediática favorable que reproduzca consignas sin cuestionarlas.
All of these organized street gangs that are terrorizing these cities, that are dealing these drugs, that are trafficking weapons, that are engaging in organized theft, armed robbery, carjacking, all of them are doing business with, at some level or another, the transnational narco-trafficking organizations. So these street crews are engaged in material support for terrorism, which is the core function of the federal government to defend and protect. Well, President Trump has literally set the people of Washington, D.C. free. They're so happy now that they can just go out and live their lives, go to their favorite restaurant, go to their favorite bar, go to their favorite pool hall, go to their favorite park. You see moms taking kids out to parks they haven't been to in years because they know the police are there. They know that President Trump is there with his law enforcement to protect them. It's a thing of beauty, Sean, but I would say to the mayor of all these Democrat cities, like Chicago, what you are doing to your own citizens is evil. Subjecting your own citizens to this constant bloodbath and then rejoicing in it is evil. And you should praise God every single day that President Trump is in the White House.
If he's going to encourage people to take to the streets over this, I will say anything that happens, he will be responsible for. I did not like his comments.
Ahora, este tipo de intervenciones, aunque exageradas, sirven para construir la idea del presidente que controla el caos. Sin embargo, la misma cadena que difunde mensajes así fue el escenario de la disputa que provocó la última ira de Trump. Comentarios de Karl Rove que, lejos de elogiarlo, advirtieron a los republicanos sobre la necesidad de atraer votantes independientes para ganar las elecciones. Bueno, aquí le tengo el post, el cual se los voy a traducir y dice de esta manera: segmento de Fox News condujo al colapso de Trump por rinoceronte Karl Rove. El operador del GOP Karl Rove hizo una aparición en Fox and Friends en la mañana del miércoles que provocó a Donald Trump arremetiera contra el comentarista conservador en Truth Social. Los comentarios de Rove en Fox fueron principalmente sobre el Partido Demócrata, del cual se burló por su reunión de verano llena de tensión, y dijo que le costaba hablar como gente normal. El DNC consiste en activistas del partido elegidos a nivel estatal y en caucus y demás por su propia naturaleza. Representan el corazón activista del Partido Demócrata. Y mira, están chiflados, no nos engañemos, dijo Rove, al preguntársele por su advertencia para los republicanos en este momento. Rove dijo lo siguiente: reconoció que las coaliciones tienden a ir y venir y que los republicanos necesitan estar dirigidos no al núcleo duro del partido, sino a ampliar el reino republicano, por así decirlo, consiguiendo independientes y ticket splitters y personas que podrían estar, ya sabes, algo sospechosas de los republicanos, pero que se necesitan ser cortejadas para ganar elecciones. Trump aparentemente se sintió ofendido por los comentarios de Rove. Cuando se le preguntó en Fox News and Friends esta mañana cómo explicar el tremendo éxito del Partido Republicano con millones de personas uniéndose a él y los Dems perdiendo millones, no pudo dar una respuesta, simplemente no pudo pronunciar las palabras presidente Donald Trump. Escribió el presidente en Truth Social antes de agregar: pero está bien, la gente lo entiende y siempre lo ha hecho. El ataque de Trump se sustenta en un recuerdo falso. Reprocha a Rove no haber contestado una pregunta que nunca existió. Esa distorsión evidencia un deterioro en su capacidad de interpretar incluso lo que ve y escucha en tiempo real. Lo inquietante es que no se trata de una crítica a un opositor, sino a un colaborador histórico del propio partido y en un medio habitual favorable.
Statistician, remember that? Just in the last month, I thought that was ironic, this well-trusted statistician, and he gets bad job numbers and then he fires someone, making the job numbers worse.
I mean, for the head of the BLS is somebody nobody knew. Lisa Cook is somebody whose name you didn't know. These are these people. He wants to call them the deep state.
Right.
These are these people who just do their work largely behind closed doors.
Right. And so owning this is what he needs to do. Changing his policies is what he needs to do. And we're just seeing the beginnings of this with the effects of these tariffs. And you're just seeing, so far, I think there was just a recent study showing something like 20% of it has been absorbed by consumers, and we're going to see 60% more in the next few months. And by the way, in the biggest cabinet meeting of all, the Minnesota State Fair, where I've been hanging out, while you guys have been glued to watching him at this cabinet meeting, I've been at the real cabinet meeting with 2 million people. They know what's going on. And those are the numbers and the people that you see in these polls where he is tanking on his handling of the economy because their grocery bills don't lie, their rent doesn't lie, their child care bills don't lie, their back-to-school costs for their kids' clothing don't lie, the strollers costs, none of this. They know what this is. He cannot fire his way out of this economy.
Yeah, I mean, you know me. I'm a big fan of Minnesota and a big fan of State Fair, so I would choose the Minnesota State Fair over pretty much everything else. But let's talk about that, because this is where stats that you have about Medicare, about health care cuts, about SNAP cuts, about agriculture, the $2,400 increase that inflation is going to hit each household, that the Yale Budget Lab has come up with those figures. So that's all figures and numbers, and of course the jobs numbers that he fired somebody for. And then you're out there talking to people. You're out there talking to real Americans. $2,400, we learned in the pandemic, and we learned in the recession of 2008. Most regular American folks don't have a whole bunch of extra money for emergencies.
They do not, and we're seeing that shrinking and shrinking as they're eating up their savings, just trying to get by. What he should be working on, which I believe we should be working on, and that I know the Democratic Party is going to be focused on, is bringing down the cost of housing, building more housing, doing something about child care and getting some innovative partnerships, public-private, when it comes to child care, bringing down health care costs, not kicking 15 million people off their health care as they did in the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill, or not taking care of these premiums that you're going to see skyrocketing in the next few months, both for people on the Affordable Care Act and people on other plans. We've already seen the numbers coming out because they decided instead they wanted to give trillions of dollars in tax cuts to billionaires. That is exactly what happened in the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill. They gave $2 trillion in tax cuts to rich people and then let everyone else suffer. And I'm telling you, the people that come up to me, the real stories of people with their moms in the nursing homes, worried that they're going to have to, they won't be able to afford that anymore. People who have one job and then a second job, but they still need SNAP to help them because they're a single mom. Those are the people that I talk to.
And by the way, the SNAP issue,
the people that are let in his cabinet meeting today.
El contraste es evidente. Mientras los ciudadanos y legisladores discuten sobre precios, empleos y la carga de los aranceles, Trump concentra sus energías en disputas personales y en ajustes de cuentas con figuras mediáticas. La desconexión entre los problemas reales y la agenda del presidente debilita aún más la imagen del gobierno capaz de dar respuestas efectivas. En conjunto, la secuencia muestra un liderazgo que se sostiene con la confrontación permanente, incluso con aliados, y que se ve incapaz de reconocer responsabilidades en materia económica. Los ataques a Fox y a Karl Rove revelan un espacio político cada vez más reducido, donde solo se admite la adulación incondicional. Mientras tanto, las consecuencias de las decisiones en materia de comercio e inflación recaen sobre los ciudadanos que ya se expresan su frustración en foros y encuestas. Ya por último, si este análisis les resultó útil, agradeceríamos un montón que se suscribieran, le dieran me gusta, comentaran su opinión y compartan el video. Nos vemos en el siguiente Rumor de Estado.
Los intentos de encubrimiento han sido una constante en la trayectoria política de Donald Trump, desde los archivos de Epstein hasta sus negocios financieros más opacos, e incluso los visibles problemas de salud que trata de ocultar. La estrategia es siempre la misma: negar, distraer y maquillar la realidad. Pero esa estrategia presenta un problema. Necesita portavoces capaces de sostener su situación, y lo que hemos visto recientemente demuestra que ni siquiera su círculo más cercano logra cumplir ese papel. La portavoz de la Casa Blanca, Karoline Leavitt, intentó defender al presidente en medio de cuestionamientos sobre su estado físico. En lugar de protegerlo, terminó revelando más de lo que debía, y con ello expuso una de las debilidades más evidentes de la actual administración: la incapacidad para controlar. Los tropiezos cognitivos de Trump ya eran tema de debate. En actos oficiales ha confundido a gobernadores, inventado nombres y mezclado cargos inexistentes. Estos episodios, que la prensa muchas veces minimiza, reflejan un deterioro que no puede pasar desapercibido en un mandatario de 79 años. El problema se agrava cuando los errores no son aislados, sino de un patrón repetitivo que genera dudas sobre su capacidad de gobernar.
Politicians like a guy like Pritzker. He ought to spend more time in the gym, actually. This guy is a disaster.
I have to give you the opportunity to respond to some of the personal attacks we heard in the Oval Office. He called you incompetent. He talked about your weight. What's your response to the president?
Well, you know, from my perspective, it takes one to know one on the weight question. And the president, of course, himself is not in good shape. So he ought to respond to that from me. I would say also that his personal attacks on me are just evidence of a guy who's still living in fifth grade. He's the kind of bully that throws invectives at people, and because he knows that what he's saying is actually commentary on himself.
Cuando Trump atacó públicamente al gobernador de Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, con comentarios sobre su peso, la respuesta fue contundente. Un recordatorio de que el propio presidente tiene un historial de problemas físicos visibles, y no solo se trata de su estado general, sino de señales concretas, como los moretones en sus manos, que su equipo intenta encubrir con maquillaje en cada aparición pública. El ejemplo más claro apareció en un gesto que parecía inofensivo: un mensaje de cumpleaños de Leavitt difundido en redes sociales. En la foto, Trump aparecía con un moretón en la mano derecha, disimulado con su maquillaje evidente. Un detalle que, en lugar de fortalecer la imagen presidencial, encendió nuevas alarmas sobre su estado de salud. La explicación ofrecida por Leavitt fue poco convincente: que los moretones eran productos de estrechar demasiadas manos. Una mentira difícil de sostener cuando las imágenes revelan una situación que parece mucho más seria. El problema no es solo médico, sino político. Un presidente que insiste en proyectar fuerza y vitalidad no puede permitirse señales de fragilidad. Sin embargo, cada intento de ocultamiento refuerza la percepción contraria, la de un líder en declive, rodeado de portavoces incapaz de contener la evidencia.
Include, quote, all entries contained within the reported leather-bound book compiled by Ms. Ghislaine Maxwell for Mr. Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday. This is the birthday book that, according to the Wall Street Journal, includes a body letter from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein with a drawing of a naked woman and a message that concludes, "Happy birthday." and may every day be another wonderful secret. Donald Trump has denied that such a letter exists, but now Congress will get to see exactly what is in that birthday book after Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna vowed to pursue that subpoena on this program last month.
It is a revelation to me that he said that that birthday book is with private lawyers in the Epstein estate. We subpoenaed the Epstein files, but that's a hard thing to do, to get the Department of Justice to cooperate in releasing those files. What's not hard to do is to subpoena private attorneys in a private estate and to get compliance. So I'm actually going to invite Bradley Edwards to meet with the House Oversight Committee, and I think we can easily move forward on this subpoena of that birthday book, and which could really advance this case.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He's the top-ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. No matter what you think about the whole Epstein thing, the compounding of what appear to be lies is becoming quite interesting. We got the audio and the transcripts of the very strange conversation that was had by the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, who is Donald Trump's lawyer, and Ghislaine Maxwell. And this issue of this birthday book came up. Can I just play for you a little about what they said about the birthday book and get your take on the other side?
Do you remember asking President Trump to submit a letter for that?
I do not.
And do you remember, would you have been the one to do that, or would somebody else have done that?
I did ask some people. I don't remember Mr. Trump. I don't remember who I did ask, but Epstein also asked people himself directly.
Okay.
So it could have happened that way, if it happened at all.
Unsatisfying, to say the least. Your take on that?
I mean, first, both Donald Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell are enormous liars, clearly. And this just continues, this massive cover-up. First of all, let's be clear. Ghislaine Maxwell is a convicted sex trafficker and abuser of young women and girls, is a known liar, has been convicted of incredible violence and serious crimes. So we shouldn't be believing anything she says. And as far as Donald Trump, going out and saying that somehow this book doesn't exist, it clearly does. I mean, we've seen it reported, of course, in the Wall Street Journal and other places. But more importantly, we've been fighting to actually get this book, and we told James Comer, both Congressman Khanna, myself, and others, that we were going to subpoena this book. And so I'm glad that Oversight is now going to get in possession of this book. I'm glad that James Comer finally agreed today to bring Alex Acosta in front of the Oversight Committee. And I think what James Comer and the Republicans finally know is that Democrats on the Oversight Committee, we are not messing around. We're going to force votes, just like we forced the Epstein files to get released. We're going to force them to take the votes that they don't want to take, and we're not going to stop until we get justice for all the victims and tell the American people that all we're hearing from them right now are lies and a massive cover-up.
Yeah, you mentioned Alex Acosta. He seems central to the operation, right? It seems that if you could hear from Alex Acosta, you could understand that either there's a cover-up, or maybe it's just as bad that rich people get good deals, and that's how it goes. But Alex Acosta was central to this thing and was not included.
Este patrón de ocultamiento no se limita a la salud. Paralelamente, el Congreso sigue presionando por los documentos relacionados con Jeffrey Epstein, incluidos los llamados archivos de cumpleaños, en los que aparecía una carta firmada por Trump. Tanto Maxwell como el propio presidente la han negado. Pero las investigaciones apuntan a que estos registros sí existen. De confirmarse, no solo quedarían expuestas relaciones incómodas, sino también una práctica constante de manipulación y encubrimiento desde el círculo presidencial. El caso de los moretones, las confusiones en actos públicos y los documentos bloqueados son piezas clave de un rompecabezas. Un presidente que insiste en ocultar debilidades, pero que en el intento termina revelándolas aún más. Déjame saber tu opinión. ¿Hasta qué punto el deterioro físico y cognitivo de Trump influye en su liderazgo? ¿Podrá el Congreso forzar la transparencia en el caso Epstein pese a las maniobras de encubrimiento? No olviden suscribirse, darle a like, compartir para seguir analizando la política estadounidense sin filtro. Esto es Rumor de Estado. El caso Jeffrey Epstein nunca desapareció del todo, Pero en las últimas semanas se ha vuelto con fuerza a la agenda de Estados Unidos, no solo porque los congresistas demócratas insisten en exigir la publicación completa de los archivos, sino porque incluso desde el propio Partido Republicano han surgido señales que comprometen directamente a Donald Trump. Una de ellas, captada por un micrófono abierto, amenaza con derrumbar el muro de silencio que su equipo intenta levantar.
Would your committee plan to subpoena these two executors of the Epstein estate as well?
We certainly would if they are relevant, and it looks like they will be relevant. But the first step is just to get the documents. And like I said, their lawyers have already made a representation to us that they fully intended to comply. Unlike the Justice Department, where it's hard to get compliance. I mean, the Justice Department only released 1% of the files. Of that 1%, 97% was already information in the public domain, and you're expecting the Justice Department to prosecute itself. That's a very hard bar. But private individuals don't have that protection. So if they don't comply with a congressional subpoena, then they really risk prosecution, criminal prosecution, both the lawyers and the executors of the estate. So I fully expect that they will comply.
Reporter Julie K. Brown has been out in front of the story from the beginning, has raised questions about whether the Justice Department ever really investigated Epstein's wealth. Do you think the documents that you're trying to obtain could provide a link between Epstein's finances and anyone else who might have been involved in crimes?
Absolutely. The reality is we do not believe that the Justice Department looked in comprehensively to all of the money. Following the money is the first principle of these investigations. I've spoken to many of the victims' lawyers who have said that there was not a comprehensive investigation. And that's one reason that Massey in my bill calls for the full release, not just of the files from the Justice Department, but also from some of the financial agencies in government. So we have a comprehensive approach to this, but putting it very simply, all we want is transparency. Get the files out there. Let's know who the people were who were committing the abuse. Let's know where the money went, and let's finally have closure for.
El congresista demócrata Ro Khanna ha mantenido una presión constante para que se liberen los documentos relacionados con Epstein. Su argumento es claro: el Departamento de Justicia apenas entregó un fragmento mínimo de información, gran parte de ella ya conocida. Según Khanna, solo una investigación exhaustiva que incluya el rastreo de los movimientos financieros permitirá identificar a quienes participaron en los abusos y garantizar la justicia de las víctimas. La insistencia de Khanna refleja un punto crucial. El encubrimiento institucional no solo protege a individuos poderosos, también erosiona la credibilidad de las instituciones encargadas de investigar. La transparencia no es solo una opción secundaria, es la base de la confianza pública. Frente a esta presión, la respuesta de Donald Trump ha sido la de siempre: negación y desvío. Cuando se le preguntó por los archivos, habló de un supuesto engaño demócrata. Trató de ligar al caso a figuras como Bill Clinton y calificó el tema de hoax. Pero detrás de esta retórica evasiva persiste una realidad incómoda. Su nombre aparece una y otra vez asociado al entorno de Epstein.
Also sending some of the Epstein files over to the House Oversight Committee today. Are you in support of them releasing all of them?
Keeping it open.
If they wanted to release,
people shouldn't be hurt, but I'm in support of keeping it totally open. I couldn't care less. You got a lot of people that it could be mentioned in those files that don't deserve to be. People, because he knew everybody in Palm Beach. I don't know anything about that, but I have said to Pam and everybody else, give them everything you can give them, because it's a Democrat hoax. It's just a hoax. The whole Epstein thing is a Democrat hoax. So we had the greatest 6 months, 7 months in the history of the presidency, and the Democrats don't know what to do, so they keep bringing up that stuff. But it affected them. Bill Clinton was on his plane and went to the island supposedly 28 times. I don't want to bring that up, frankly. You have Larry, whatever his name is, Summers, the head of Harvard, who was Jeffrey Epstein's best friend. Nobody ever talks.
El golpe más duro llegó dentro de su propio partido. El congresista republicano Mike Collins, en un encuentro local y sin saber que estaba siendo grabado, reconoció que está seguro de que Trump figura en los archivos de Epstein. No aportó pruebas, pero su comentario refleja una percepción cada vez más difícil de contener, incluso dentro del Partido Republicano. Existe la convicción de que el presidente no podrá desligarse por completo de este escándalo. El problema no se limita a lo que Trump diga o deje de decir. El rol de la prensa también está bajo escrutinio. Algunos periodistas han enfrentado al presidente con preguntas directas, obteniendo respuestas evasivas o incluso insultos. Sin embargo, gran parte del cuerpo de prensa en la Casa Blanca ha optado por la pasividad. Ante un presidente que responde con mentiras abiertas o vulgaridad, lo que predomina muchas veces es el silencio.
Does not care. Nothing can make them care. Most of the White House press corps has no idea what any of those victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have said under oath about what happened to them. We are watching the worst president in history manipulate the worst White House press corps in history every day. But not Catherine Lacey and not Nancy Cortez, not today. It was Catherine Lucy of Bloomberg who got Donald Trump to lie about the J.D. Vance meeting, about the Epstein situation.
Is President Vance hosting a gathering this evening to talk about how to respond to the Epstein situation?
Is he working on what?
Is he hosting some kind of gathering of top advisors this evening to talk about how to respond to the Epstein situation?
I don't know. I could ask you that question.
Donald Trump knows. That was Donald Trump lying. Everyone in that room knows that Donald Trump was lying when he said he doesn't know if his vice president was having a meeting about him. The other reporters in that room did not care that Donald Trump just lied to their faces and laughed at them, saying, I don't know, I could ask you that question. These are the same White House reporters, many of them, who screamed at Joe Biden in unison about the same subject when they believed their job was to attack him. And when they teamed up to attack Joe Biden's White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, they conducted coordinated, screaming attacks on her. And Donald Trump stands there and lies to their faces, insults them, and laughs at them, and they accept it. Here's the rest of what Donald Trump said in response to Catherine Lucy of Bloomberg.
I don't know. I could ask you that question. I don't know of it, but I think here's the man right here.
I saw it reported today, and it's completely fake news. We're not meeting to talk about the Epstein situation, and I think the reporter who reported it needs to get better sources.
Look, the whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats because we've had the most successful 6 months in the history of our country, and that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
Esta normalización resulta peligrosa porque al minimizar las mentiras o el lenguaje degradante de un líder político, los medios terminan contribuyendo a lo que algunos analistas llaman definición hacia abajo de los estándares presidenciales. Lo que antes era inaceptable se convierte en rutina y en ese proceso se pierde la capacidad de exigir responsabilidad. El caso de Epstein no es una cuestión del pasado. Su sombra se proyecta sobre la política actual porque revela cómo las redes de poder, dinero e impunidad pueden sobrevivir con el paso del tiempo. Y si figuras como Trump logran evadir el escrutinio, el mensaje para la ciudadanía es devastador, que la justicia en Estados Unidos no se aplica de la misma manera para todos. Y déjame saber qué opinas tú. ¿Creen que los archivos de Epstein revelarán un vínculo directo entre Donald Trump y este escándalo? ¿Qué responsabilidad tienen los médicos de comunicación en dejar que se silencien preguntas incómodas? Si este análisis te pareció útil, los invitamos a suscribirse, dejar su like, compartir este video y comentar. Así seguimos construyendo un espacio de reflexión crítica sobre la política en Estados Unidos. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Los intentos de encubrimiento sobre la salud de Donald Trump se han convertido en un factor central de su estrategia política. No se trata solo de un maquillaje para disimular moretones o de declaraciones grandilocuentes sobre su energía, sino de un esfuerzo coordinado para negar cualquier señal de deterioro físico y cognitivo. Sin embargo, en los últimos días, esas señales han sido imposibles de ocultar. Testimonios, videos filtrados y contradicciones públicas han dejado en evidencia lo que la Casa Blanca intenta tapar. El rol de los voceros como Caroline Leavitt es clave en este esquema. Su tarea consiste en defender a un incansable presidente, capaz de trabajar sin límites, a alguien casi inmortal en el discurso oficial. Pero lo que realmente se observa es un patrón preocupante. Un equipo de comunicación más preocupado en maquillar la realidad que en responder con transparencia.
The greatest president of your lifetime.
I know this is breaking news to everybody, but the president is not telling the truth. What happened right there was when I first met the president, and then after he started talking about how I'm a good-looking guy, I started talking about the importance of the Key Bridge. and how this state put on a case study on how to recover in times of crisis, that we were able to bring closure to all 6 families, to the individuals who were lost that night on the Key Bridge. And when they told us it was going to take 11 months to clear the federal channel, that this state got it done in 11 weeks. And we started talking about how it was going to get done. And then he later on invited me to come sit with him at the game. And I told him, I said, I'm good. I have my own seats. And I went to go sit with the cadets and the midshipmen. So, no, I never called him the greatest. And I just find it absolutely comical that that was the way he remembered that conversation.
Incluso fuentes cercanas a Trump, como el escritor Michael Wolff, han señalado un contraste inquietante. Mientras sus allegados lo describen como inagotable, al mismo tiempo reconocen que en algún momento simplemente se apagará. Esa contradicción ilustra la negación que domina su entorno, donde no se admite la fragilidad, pero se impone el relato de la resistencia. La estrategia oficial, sin embargo, enfrenta un problema. Cada aparición política multiplica las dudas, la explicación sobre las manos amoratadas, los intentos de ocultar inflamaciones en fotografías oficiales y las respuestas evasivas de portavoces terminan generando más sospechas que certezas. En política, lo que se oculta suele ser tan revelador como lo que se dice. El caso más reciente expuso este dilema con claridad. Donald Trump aseguró públicamente que el gobernador de Maryland, Wes Moore, lo había llamado el mejor presidente de su vida. Las imágenes difundidas posteriormente no solo desmienten esa afirmación, sino que lo dejaron al descubierto un episodio incómodo. Moore no solo negó haber hecho ese elogio, también rechazó la invitación de Trump a compartir palco en un evento deportivo.
Those are numbers that justify what the president is saying. I want you to listen actually today, because this was a point he kept making repeatedly during this cabinet meeting, which is basically he's winning a political game against Democrats, that they're making other Democrats defend crime numbers like what I just said there. Listen to how the president put it today.
The Democrats have lost 2.5 million. Other than that, they're extremely happy. No, they're very depressed. They're very depressed. And their new box that they've fallen into is crime. There was a consultant on one of the shows this morning I was watching. I thought he was very good. He's a Democrat consultant. And he was screaming, no, no, don't let him do this to you. It's another trap.
Do you worry that it's a trap?
I worry that he's not taking this seriously. This isn't a game. This is not politics. The 8 years under the previous governor in Maryland, we went 8 years in Baltimore with 300 plus homicides every single year unabated. That during that time, during the 8 years of my predecessor, the homicide rate in the state of Maryland nearly doubled, the non-fatal shooting rate did double, and I refused to be a governor who was just going to sit there and offer thoughts and prayers while we allowed bloodshed in our neighborhood. So what did we do? We actually got serious. We actually started working together. We started making historic investments in our community groups and in local law enforcement. We started actually making investments to ensure that we could use technologies to stop crime before it happened. And if someone committed a violent crime, particularly with a firearm, I want them in handcuffs in 24 hours. We started taking this seriously. And that's the problem that I'm seeing here, is that we are actually working together to take this issue seriously. And right now, from the President of the United States, with his jeering cackles around him, that the only thing we are hearing is them laughing about the fact that this is a political ploy. It is real to people who have lived in communities for so long that have been neglected and that have been ignored. And I can tell you right now, when they are watching the fact that this is just becoming a political game, to those who are sitting in positions who could actually do something about it, that is the thing that will have consequences in the ballot box later on.
Este tipo de situaciones no son simples errores de memoria, son ejemplos de cómo la construcción de falsos recuerdos y la repetición de relatos ficticios terminan chocando con la evidencia pública. Y lo más preocupante es que en lugar de admitir equivocaciones, el círculo de Trump opta por recortar fragmentos de video, omitir momentos claves y reforzar lo que ya no resiste el contraste con los hechos. En paralelo, mientras se intenta sostener la idea de un presidente fuerte y lúcido, Trump desplaza el foco hacia otros temas, como el crimen en ciudades demócratas. Pero allí también surge una problemática. Gobernadores como Wes Moore señalan que Mientras en sus estados se enfrentan problemas con políticas concretas, la Casa Blanca reduce el tema a un juego de manipulación electoral. Lo que está en juego aquí va más allá de la salud personal de un mandatario, es la credibilidad de un sistema político que depende de la confianza pública. Cuando la negación sustituye la transparencia y el encubrimiento reemplaza el debate honesto, lo que se erosiona no es solo la figura de Trump, sino la confianza en las instituciones que deberían rendir cuentas. Y yo te pregunto a ti, ¿consideran que el deterioro de Trump está siendo deliberadamente encubierto por su entorno? ¿Qué impacto creen que tendría la campaña presidencial una revelación contundente sobre su estado de salud? Si este análisis te resultó útil, los invitamos a suscribirse, dejar su like y compartir este video para seguir ampliando el debate sobre el rumbo político en Estados Unidos. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Donald Trump intenta proyectar fortaleza, pero lo que vemos con más claridad en cada nueva crisis es una imagen opuesta: debilidad, inseguridad y desgaste. En los últimos días, esta contradicción quedó expuesta nuevamente tras el choque con el gobernador demócrata de Maryland, Wes Moore. Lo que comenzó como un cuestionamiento a la militarización de Washington terminó en una demostración del deterioro político y personal de Trump, amplificado por sus propios desvaríos en redes sociales. El discurso de Trump sigue girando en torno a la idea de fuerza y control, pero cuando esta situación se confronta con muchos hechos en concreto, lo que emerge es un vacío. Gavin Newsom lo señaló en su momento: Trump construyó un aparato de seguridad personal más caro a una guardia privada que a un cuerpo institucional comprometido a la Constitución. Esa advertencia, que parecía exagerada para algunos, hoy se conecta directamente con el intento de Trump de normalizar la presencia de la Guardia Nacional en ciudades en donde no existía una justificación clara.
Police force in the world, when they're done with this, all that funding and that big beautiful portrayal allows more resources for this private police force that increasingly is showing a tendency not to swear an oath to the Constitution, but to the President of the United States. And he'll be sending them to voting booths and polling places all across this country. This is a real and serious moment in U.S. history. And by the way, I say that as an American, not as a Democrat. Every Republican should be ashamed about this and scared to death about not just these authoritarian tendencies, but these authoritarian actions by the president. He is weak. He's weakness masquerading as strength. And that makes him more dangerous.
Lo que denuncia Newsom no es un detalle menor. Se trata de un patrón: usar la fuerza estatal para beneficio personal y proyectar autoridad donde no la hay. En realidad, Trump nunca mostró capacidad de gobernar con visión de largo plazo. Su administración operaba bajo la lógica de la inmediatez y la propaganda, nunca en función de políticas sostenibles. El gobernador Wes Moore lo hizo evidente cuando rechazó la presencia de tropas en Washington, argumentando no solo el costo desmedido, sino la inconstitucionalidad de esa medida. Moore además expuso un punto central: mientras Trump insiste en desplegar fuerzas para demostrar control, descuida los problemas estructurales que afectan a los ciudadanos en su vida diaria, como el aumento de costo de vida.
So here in D.C., there are guardsmen from 6 different states on the street. The mission is, quote, beautification, duty, and support. The defense secretary has authorized them to carry M4 and M17 rifles, but to date, we have not been able to locate anyone armed within the National Guard on the streets of D.C. Why, though, are you so opposed to this deployment?
One, it is not sustainable. You cannot continue this type of pace of operations, particularly when it's costing over $1 million a day in order to do this. The second, it's not scalable. You're not going to be able to do this in every single major American city, particularly when many of the cities that have the highest crime rates are the places that have actually deployed their National Guards to Washington, D.C. So who's going to go do the work in their cities? The third, it's unconstitutional. It's a direct violation of the 10th Amendment. And if for a party that talks about state rights, it's amazing how they're having such a big government approach in the way they're conducting public safety. The fourth reason is because it's deeply disrespectful to the members of the National Guard. You know, as someone who actually deployed overseas and served my country in combat, to ask these men and women to do a job that they're not trained for is just deeply disrespectful. And so when we're thinking about all of these lasting factors, when we're thinking about the fact that it serves as a distraction from the fact that the president's disastrous economic policies are making everything more expensive for everyday Americans and making life harder for everyday Americans, there is a multitude of reasons that I am against this and I will not authorize.
La reacción de Trump fue previsible: un ataque personal cargado de resentimiento y ejecutado a horas de la madrugada en su propia plataforma digital. No hubo un debate serio sobre las acusaciones. Hubo, en cambio, un intento de desacreditar el servicio militar de Moore. Mientras el propio Trump arrastra la marca de haber evitado el servicio alegando problemas médicos menores, esa comparación lo deja aún más expuesto. Un presidente que nunca sirvió, cuestionando a un veterano de guerra por un error administrativo. Este episodio confirma dos dinámicas. Primero, que Trump vive en un ciclo permanente de confrontación, donde la respuesta nunca es política sino personal, que ese comportamiento ya no proyecta autoridad sino fragilidad. Sus mensajes erráticos en la madrugada son interpretados como síntomas de desgaste, no como estrategias de liderazgo. Y si algo faltaba para completar el cuadro fue la sobrereacción de su administración en un caso menor, la detención de un manifestante que arrojó un sándwich a un agente federal. En circunstancias normales, ese incidente habría pasado desapercibido. Sin embargo, la Casa Blanca lo convirtió en una pieza propagandística con despliegue de fuerzas especiales, como si se tratara de un operativo antiterrorista. El resultado fue ridículo. Un jurado se negó siquiera a presentar cargos graves, desmontando todo.
Veteran who lost his temper and threw a Subway sandwich at a federal agent while protesting Donald Trump's takeover of the Capitol.
No, the
That happened earlier this month. Dunn was initially detained and then released. Now, I think it is not a good idea to throw sandwiches at people. I don't think Dunn should have done that. But the response to the sandwich throwing incident from the White House wasn't just disproportionate. It was absolutely unhinged.
An individual went up to one of the federal law enforcement officers and started jumping up and down, screaming at him, berating him, yelling at him. And then he took a Subway sandwich about this big and took it and threw it at the officer. He thought it was funny. Well, he doesn't think it's funny today because we charged him with a felony, assault on a police officer. And we're going to back the police to the hilt. So there, stick your Subway sandwich somewhere else.
According to local news report, Dunn repeatedly tried to turn himself in upon seeing what a big deal the White House was making over his case, but he was unsuccessful. Instead, his arrest was the subject of one of the most deranged propaganda videos I've ever seen in my life, certainly ever seen put out by the U.S. government. It looks like a scene from Narcos or maybe a Paul Verhoeven film like RoboCop. What appears to be about a dozen heavily armed FBI agents and U.S. Marshals with body armor and riot shields storming a luxury condo building in Washington's West End to detain a guy in jeans who is obviously not resisting in any way, all because he is accused of throwing a sandwich. And here's the kicker. Today we learned that federal prosecutors were not able to convince a grand jury to charge him with a felony. A group of his peers simply refused to buy the government's ginned-up case. And to be clear, in normal times, it is extraordinarily rare for a grand jury to refuse to approve an indictment. The deck is heavily stacked towards the prosecutors in these situations. There's the old cliche, right? You could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And yet, the U.S. Attorney's Office for DC.
La exageración de Trump y su círculo refleja la misma constante. Donde debería haber templanza, hay exceso. Donde debería haber estrategia, hay impulsividad. Y el verdadero peligro ya no está solo en la fragilidad de Trump, sino en cómo esta debilidad lo empuja a sobreactuar, a militarizar conflictos menores y degradar instituciones con fines propagandísticos. La política estadounidense está atravesando un momento en que la fuerza real ya no se mide por el volumen de discurso ni por el despliegue de tropas en la calle, sino por la capacidad de construir soluciones estables y de gobernar con respeto a la legalidad. Y en ese terreno, Trump se revela no como un líder fuerte, sino como un hombre en declive atrapado en su propia fragilidad. Y yo te pregunto a ti, ¿qué significa para la democracia que un presidente insista en usar las fuerzas del Estado como herramienta personal? ¿Creen que la imagen de debilidad de Trump lo hace menos peligroso o al contrario, lo vuelve más impredecible? Si este análisis te ha resultado útil, te invitamos a suscribirte, darle like, compartir y comentar este video para que más personas puedan sumarse a la conversación. Esto es Rumor de Estado. El enfrentamiento entre Donald Trump y Gavin Newsom no se limita a un cruce partidista más. El gobernador de California ha convertido la crítica directa en un recurso político constante, señalando abusos de poder, contradicciones y excesos de la administración. En esta ocasión, su estrategia alcanzó a Melania Trump, lo que provocó una reacción aireada del presidente. Analizar este episodio no es una cuestión de frivolidad, muestra hasta qué punto la política de Trump está condicionada por la percepción personal y por la necesidad de defender su imagen y la de su entorno cercano. Recordatorio rápido: si te gusta este tipo de contenido, apóyanos con un me gusta, suscribiéndote y comentando, ya que el 98% de las personas que nos ven no están suscritas. Vamos con la noticia.
Donald Trump sent masked men to the event, ICE and Border Patrol, primarily the Border Patrol, to intimidate folks. Poor guy was selling strawberries, was arrested. I imagine he must have been on the most wanted list. Dangerous felon. Disappeared. That is a preview of things to come. Don't think for a second he's going to stop in the National Guard. It's an interesting fact. 4,000 National Guard were federalized, over 700 members of the United States Marine. 95% of them did nothing. They sat there looking for things to do. Hundreds plus $1 million wasted. Literally looking for an assignment. They were taken off the beat. These are police officers, your National Guard. These are firefighters. These are teachers. These are caregivers. They were taken off the streets doing real work to keep you safe and protected, to keep you healthy. And they sat there in the armory looking for something to do. He will send the National Guard. He will send them all across this country, and he will do so through Election Day. And if you think I'm exaggerating, consider the fact that as he demobilized our National Guard, he kept hundreds of them through Election Day. And he'll do so working in concert, as he has with ICE and Border Patrol, to do the same. You have the largest private police force in the world. When they're done with this, all that funding and that big, beautiful portrayal allows more resources for this private police force that increasingly is showing a tendency not to swear an oath to the Constitution, but to the President of the United States. And he'll be sending them to voting booths and polling places all across this country. This is a real and serious moment in U.S. history. And by the way, I say that as an American, not as a Democrat. Every Republican should be ashamed about this and scared to death about not just these authoritarian tendencies, but these authoritarian actions by the president. He is weak. He's weakness masquerading as strength. And that makes him more dangerous than most people.
El señalamiento es directo. Utilizar recursos públicos para proyectar fuerza no fortalece la democracia, la debilita. Newsom plantea que estas prácticas no son simples amenazas, sino hechos consumados con impacto en la vida civil y el equilibrio institucional.
But he name-dropped you personally yesterday, essentially trying to say that crime is worse in Louisiana than it is in California. Take a listen, we'll get your thoughts.
If he is to invest in crime suppression, I hope the President of the United States would look at the facts. Just consider Speaker Johnson's state and district. Just look at the murder rate. That's nearly 4 times higher than California's in Louisiana.
Have at it.
Again, Gavin Newsom will do anything for attention.
Este contraste de cifras expone la superficialidad del discurso republicano sobre ley y orden. No se trata de un debate sincero sobre seguridad, sino de un argumento diseñado para atacar a gobernadores demócratas, aunque las estadísticas de sus propios estados lo contradigan. Y aquí estamos con la supuesta portada de Vanity Fair con Melania Trump. Newsom respondió con una parodia que dejó en evidencia la ansiedad del entorno trumpista por reconocimiento cultural. El punto de fondo no es la portada en sí, sino la obsesión del trumpismo con ser aceptado en los espacios culturales que dice despreciar. La reacción de Fox dedicando segmentos a comparar la presencia de primera damas en revistas refuerza esta contradicción. Se presentan como un movimiento antisistema, pero buscan la validación de los mismos símbolos que critican.
But I think that's actually just an excuse. I actually think these people are sick. There's something wrong. So we send hundreds of millions of gallons of water a day into the Pacific Ocean. They turn a valve and the valve heads out. And we turned the valve back. I actually had to do it using force. We turned the valve back, and now they have water, but not as much as they should have, because they should and I'm telling Gavin Newsom by this conversation right now, turn the rest of the water on. Turn it on.
El mensaje carece de sustento técnico, pero cumple con un objetivo: mantener a Newsom como antagonista permanente y trasladar la discusión de problemas concretos hacia acusaciones simplistas. La lógica no es la misma que observamos en la defensa de Melania: convertir cualquier cuestionamiento en una afrenta personal contra el presidente y su entorno.
Maximizing the viewership. Was Jill on the cover?
Yeah.
Twice, I think. She was on the cover twice. And then you have was Michelle Obama on the cover?
3 times.
3 times. Okay.
On Vogue.
Do you think those two women are prettier than Melania Trump?
You're not going to answer that. Not going to answer that. Not going to answer that.
No, do you think they're prettier?
No, Melania...
Is it not about pretty? Is it about fashion? Because Melania is also more fashionable.
Right. She is. She's the most attractive first lady ever. Let's be honest. I have not seen
Martha Washington?
I have not seen her.
She's not your type?
The problem is when you have portraits instead of pictures,
you can't really get a good look.
Thank you.
What about Jackie O?
All right. What's your point? Why?
What's my point?
Yeah.
What's your point? You said she's going to start dating somebody.
Este tipo de coberturas revela una vulnerabilidad estratégica y mientras insiste en que el movimiento conservador representa al ciudadano común, su élite política centra energía en reclamos de estatus y apariciones en portadas y reconocimiento social. La contradicción es evidente: quienes dicen combatir al establishment buscan en realidad al ser parte de él.
But presidents are not all powerful. That's one thing that we need to be very clear about and keep stating. They cannot just do whatever the heck they want. And that's one of the reasons why there are a bunch of important jobs throughout the federal government that are designed as independent from the White House and from the president, whoever is the president. Jobs where people remain in their roles through administrations of both parties. Some of these jobs have 10-year terms, 12-year terms, 14-year terms. Jobs where new presidents are not allowed to come in and just start firing people. But as we've seen, Trump has been on a bit of a total rampage since taking office, firing as many of those independent voices as he can possibly get away with. Now, there may be people or jobs that most people haven't heard of, but they are still very important. They're playing very important roles in the government, some of the most important ones. Now, in January, Trump fired 2 members of the National Labor Relations Board, the agency that protects the rights of private sector employees against unfair labor practices, a pretty important thing. He also fired 2 members of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which protects workers from discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, age, or disability, also very important. In February, he fired the chair of the Merit System Protection Board, which protects federal workers from being forced out of their jobs without cause. And in March, he fired 2 Democrats on the Federal Trade Commission, the agency responsible for protecting American consumers from fraud. To be absolutely clear here, in case there's any doubt, Trump was not allowed to fire any of those people under the law. And at the time, many of them stood up and challenged their firings in court. Not an easy thing to do, by the way. And one case even made its way to the Supreme Court. Now, as you might expect, the court's conservative majority was all too eager to validate Donald Trump's reckless actions. In a 6-3 decision, all 6 conservative justices decided to let Trump's firing stand while the case played out in the lower courts. How courageous of them. But even those 6 very conservative justices, 3 of them whom Trump nominated himself, remember, made clear that there are some people Donald Trump should not be allowed to fire, effectively saying there are some jobs that are so important they must be protected from presidential overreach. Specifically, they said the president should not be able to arbitrarily fire members of the Federal Reserve. Because, as they said, the Federal Reserve is a uniquely structured institution with a distinct historical tradition of independence. All for good reason. So their message was pretty clear. I mean, the conservative justices were basically saying, all right, Donald, we're going to let you fire these people that no president has been allowed to fire before. But we're drawing the line at the Federal Reserve. Do not try to fire anyone on the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. That was the message Trump got from a co-equal branch of government, a conservative one, by the way. But what those conservative justices should have known, what everybody watching this probably knows and knew before they did, is this. If you give Donald Trump an inch, he will always take a mile. And so last week, Trump just blatantly leaped over that red line that the Supreme Court drew for him. He fired Lisa Cook, a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and another brazen, likely illegal power grab. But here's the other thing that happened. Lisa Cook made it very clear that she is not going to go down without a fight. Today, she filed a lawsuit challenging Trump's authority, telling the court that if Trump is allowed to fire her, then he can, quote, remove any Federal Reserve Board member with whom he disagrees about policy based on chalked up allegations. Yeah, exactly. Lisa Cook understands that the only way to stop Donald Trump from seizing absolute power for himself is to fight back. And she is not the only one. Today, Trump fired another member of an independent agency, a member of the Surface Transportation Board, who Trump himself actually appointed during his first term. He, too, is vowing to challenge his firing. And other federal officials are standing up as well.
El conjunto de todos estos episodios ofrece una visión clara de la dinámica actual. Un presidente que reacciona con furia ante burlas y símbolos culturales que convierte a la primera dama en parte de su disputa y que al mismo tiempo insiste en controlar instituciones independientes. La preocupación no debería limitarse al tono o al espectáculo mediático, sino al impacto en la estabilidad democrática. La reducción del debate político a agravios personales deja en segundo plano los problemas de seguridad, economía y gobernabilidad que afectan a millones de ciudadanos. Ahora, por último, si este análisis te resultó útil, te gustó, por favor, suscríbete, deja un like y comparte este video. Mira que, como dije al principio, el 98% de las personas no se suscriben que ven este contenido. Entonces, sin nada más que decir, nos vemos en el próximo Rumor de Estado.